You may have noticed that Carter showed in part one of this live stream a RSS converter. And what he'd basically done there was create a custom Haystack component. And I'm going to share a specific custom component that we built with a community member called Rex. So this is not just my work I'm presenting here. I'm presenting a piece of work that we did together in the Haystack Discord. And I'm just going to start with a story time. So at the end of the day, with this presentation, you'll see how we were able to create a Hacker News TLDR, all built in Haystack. In Haystack 2.0 to be precise, but I'll get into that in a bit. Hopefully you can see my screen and this is all fine. Please let me know if you can't. It all started one day in our Discord when I was particularly bored. And when I'm particularly bored, sometimes, we haven't been doing this recently, I do encourage you to join our Discord because this does happen from time to time. I'll send a message saying, hey, does anyone want to join in a voice channel? And maybe I can share my screen and maybe we can build something together. So the work I'm presenting today is not just my work. It's one particular community member called Rec. He's also a Haystack ambassador. And we decided, or actually this was all his idea. I just did the live coding section of it. That wouldn't it be cool if we were to build a RAG pipeline, a retrieval augmented generative pipeline, where you give it a number and whatever the trending Hacker News articles are, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this screen before. We get a short TLDR summary with the URL to the actual trending article. So we did that. This right now, the screenshot you're seeing is from last Thursday. And then we made that into a Streamlit app. So we were able to have like a slider that you can go from 0 to 5, 1 to 5, and then it'll give you a summary of that many of the top trending Hacker News articles. This has also been made into a Hugging Face space. And if you scan that QR code, although you'll have the links and everything later on as well, you'll be able to play around with it. And I've made it so that you can select between GPT-4 and a Mistral model before you actually get the summaries. This presentation is full of QR codes because I'm going to do I'm going to show you some code, and the idea is that if you want to, you can play alongside and see if you can get something working too, but you don't have to, and I'll be sending all of the links later on as well. But first, let's talk about Haystack, because I'm sure there are people here that are new to Haystack, so I'm just going to briefly summarize it. So Haystack is a fully open source Python framework to build LLM applications, and it provides a bunch of tools like you saw Carter build the Swifty GPT in part one. There were quite a few components that he made use of in his pipeline, and Haystack, the point of Haystack is to provide a bunch of these components for you. And the building blocks of Haystack are pipelines and components where you can combine components to build a full pipeline. But the point of Haystack isn't to just provide you those components and that's all you can do. You can also extend Haystack. So that's what we're going to be doing. Another bit of news is a few weeks ago, actually nearly a month ago now, we released Haystack 2.0, and all of the code you're going to be seeing here is based on Haystack 2.0. What does a pipeline look like? So this is very similar to the pipeline that Carter ended up building. This is, in the Haystack world, a very classic retrieval augmented generative pipeline. You may start with an embedder that's given a query, embeds the user's query, that then gives that embedding to a retriever who is able to extract data from maybe a vector database. And then you create some sort of prompt. How do you want to instruct the model to do what? And then we send that entire augmented prompt to a generator. You don't have to understand what every single bit of these components do, what they are. But the point I'm trying to make is that a pipeline usually consists of a bunch of components, but it can be very, very customizable. This particular pipeline is doing a retrieval augmented generative pipeline. What are these components? A component is very simply a structure that expects an input or maybe multiple inputs and produces an output. And you can attach those components. For example, I can have an embedder that is taking in a query. Here I'm asking, is Taylor Swift Queen of the World? And it creates an embedding or a vector. That could be an embedder. And maybe we want to do some retrieval, and maybe we then have a retriever that is expecting an embedding and then returns a document. So here we would be doing a very simple retrieval pipeline. By attaching these two components, we've just basically created a retrieval pipeline, a document retrieval pipeline. But with Haystack 2.0 especially, components have become a lot more flexible. So for example, I could have a component that has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. And then I can attach that to another component that has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. And I've done a trick here because in Haystack 2.0, you can be very, very specific as to what output is going into what input. So as you can see here, output 1 of my component is actually going into input 2 of the second component. So what we wanted to basically do is, well, Haystack does not, if you go into our documentation, you won't see a Hacker News fetcher. So we wanted to build our own Hacker News fetcher that, given a number, top K, is able to return articles. And what we wanted to do is plonk that Hacker News fetcher into a regular Haystack pipeline. And this is what I'm going to show you how we can do. And at the end of the day, this is the pipeline that we achieved. So given a top K, the Hacker News fetcher retrieves some articles from Hacker News, gives that to the prompt builder. We'll see what the prompt builder does. And then a generator generates some responses. Hopefully some of you have played around with the Hugging Face space already, so you know what it looks like. How does that work? Well, you only need to do a few things. A component in Haystack 2.0 is a very simple interface. It's a uniform interface for every single component. So everything you see in Haystack, whether it's a generator or an embedder, or indeed the RSS converter that you saw Carter build in part 1, the only requirements we have to be able to build those is that we have a component decorator. We create a class with a component decorator. We have a run method that returns something, a dictionary. And we also include component.output types in the run method. And this is for pipeline validation. So here, what we're basically saying is this very creative my custom component. Sorry about that. We're basically telling the pipeline that whenever this component is added in whatever part of the pipeline, it expects query as input, and it will be returning something called documents. That's a list of strings. And here I've just returned 2 strings, hi and bye. This does nothing. And so how did we end up with this particular demo? Well, for this, I want to switch over to Colab, and then we can run through the code. Hopefully you can see this. So I'm going to share with everyone this Colab notebook. You'll have all of the resources that you need to actually run this and learn about Haystack 2.0. The only thing I did was I installed Haystack 2.0, and for my custom component, I decided to use, well, actually, this was not my idea. Again, Rec came up with the idea of using Newspapers 3K. It's a very useful package. And what we did was we built a component called Hacker News Fetcher. And what this does is, given a top K integer, it fetches the articles, and we also included the URL of the article. And then we create Haystack documents. We add the text of the article, but we also, Haystack documents can also include metadata. So we decided to add that because it can be very useful in a retrieval augmented generative pipeline. So we added the title of the article and the URL of the article. You'll see why we're doing that and how we use that in a bit as well. So in this particular collab, I'm going to be using Hugging Face TGI. I'm going to be using a Mistral model. So, but at the end of the day, basically, I've got a component called Hacker News Fetcher that's going to return to me a list of documents. Each of those documents, actually, Specifically, it will return to me top K number of documents, and each of those documents will have the content of the trending article, the title, and the URL. Actually, I think we ended up not using Newspapers 3K, so maybe I don't have to install that. Next up, I want to basically tell the LLM what I want it to do with the retrieved articles, Hacker News articles. So I've created a prompt that is being very specific. You will be provided one or more Hacker News posts, followed by their URL. For the posts you have, provide a short summary, followed by the URL that the post can be found at. So this is where you can see this type of prompt engineering. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't always work with every model. But if you're using a good model, ideally, you're not asking the model to just return a summary, but you can also reference it and give the URL to people who are reading this. And the way I do that is, this is why we wanted to add some metadata, is I'm using a for loop, and in Haystack 2.0, this has become a lot more readable than it was in Haystack 1.x. So if you're using Haystack 1.x, this is a good reason to switch over. I really like this addition. We're using Ginger templating, so you can very clearly see what's going on. We're basically saying for every article, the post content is article.content. Great. Haystack documents have content property. And post URL, I'm accessing meta URL because I added URL to metadata. Next up, I'm building my Haystack pipeline. So I'm creating a prompt builder that uses this prompt template. Like I said, we're using Hugging Face TGI generator. You can switch this over to whatever model you want. The Hugging Face space that we'll probably try out in a bit allows you to switch between a Mistral model and GPT-4. And then I'm simply saying my fetcher is Hacker News Fetcher. And this is how you create pipelines in Haystack. First, I add all of my components to pipeline, and then I connect specifically the articles returned by my Hacker News Fetcher to promptbuilder.articles. And this is where you can see the input for the prompt builder. And next, I'm telling the prompt builder to send over the prompt to my large language model. You can also visualize what your pipeline will look like. So if you're interested, you can use the pipe.draw. I think we now have to use pipe.draw ever since Haystack 2.0. And next, I simply I ran this, I think, about an hour ago, and I checked and it was correct, so that's good. I asked for the top 2 Hacker News articles. And at the time, there was a Intel GitHub repository at the top. I don't know if it's still there. And then something else as well. All right, so let's see if I can. Oh, the Zoom tab is really not making my life easy. I want to switch over to another tab. Can I not move you? There we are. Let's see. This is the Hugging Face space. It's open for everyone to use, but it does ask for a OpenAI key or a Hugging Face TGI API key. So what should we do? Let's use GPT-4. I think that's usually a bit more consistent with making sure that we get references. Let me get my key. You have to add your key at the sidebar here. And let's do 1. And then hopefully it should get summaries, and someone could maybe have a check on Hacker News and make sure that it's the correct one. This is not perfect yet, if you were to ask me, because here I'm allowing you to go up to 5, but my pipeline doesn't include any component that does any sort of summary. So in a lot of cases, it may go over the limits, and then I'm getting an error from OpenAI because I'm simply adding all of the articles in full length. So one way to improve this would maybe be that the pipeline automatically summarizes each article before sending the entire prompt, especially if you're asking for all 5 article summaries. With that, let's head back to my presentation. And I think I am at the end. I'm happy to answer any questions. This collab is going to be available for everyone It's doing something very simple. It's one of the core functionalities of Haystack, providing custom component building functionality. And as you can see, when you've built a custom component, depending on what the inputs and outputs are, you have to make sure that it's the expected input and output. However, you can basically add it into any segment of your pipeline, wherever that component might be required. So if Haystack doesn't already have the component you need, you can go ahead and build one like Carter has, or build one like we have. We have, by the way, I'm just going to end this by saying we have another webinar coming up, or a live stream coming up with Cloudflare next week. And if you're in Berlin, we also have an in-person event coming up. So you can find all of those at our Luma calendar. All right, Tilda, you can come back. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. It's cool to see how easy it is to build a custom component in Haystack with just a few lines of code, and anything that lets me learn what's hot from Hacker News without having to look at the comments is a win in my life. So I did not see any questions in the QA or in the chat, so I'll give it a minute. And if people have questions, pop them in there, we'll answer them. And if not, we can just send you on your merry way.
Ooh, what would be an example of a not simple app? I've just seen this come in. Well, if I can go wild and just give you one of the top thing that pops into my head, because I think not only is the custom component that's built in that example quite unique, it's also got quite a unique way of prompting. So one thing that I didn't go through in this presentation, I actually have an extra slide for it. Hold on, I have an extra slide for it. I thought maybe someone might ask this. Okay, great. One thing that we didn't go through is that since Haystack 2.0, you saw that pipelines can branch out. But one thing that I didn't go through for this particular presentation was that pipelines can also loop. So technically, if you want to build a service that runs until something else happens, you can do that. So one application that we built was imagine you have some meeting notes, and this is a meeting about a software product, and there's a GitHub repository for it too. And imagine you want from those meeting notes simply to have GitHub issues created. GitHub issues maybe have labels, maybe have to conform to a certain title schema, etc. So it's actually quite structured, and maybe you also just use the GitHub API and create the issues for yourself. So one thing, and there's a tutorial for this as well, one thing that we built was a pipeline that can continuously validate structured output, because not every time is a large language model going to provide to you correct structured output. So we created a custom component called the output validator that basically can validate that the structured output that the generator provided you conforms to your Pydantic model. And if not, the output validator then can feed back into the prompt builder. So this is kind of like an ongoing for loop, giving reasons as to the error message as to why the structured output is incorrect, and asks for it to retry. And it goes on until either it gets a valid reply, or you hit the maximum number of loops we allow. Why do we have a maximum number of loops we allow? Obviously, if you build this type of pipeline, which is quite complex and it does go in a for loop, and let's say you're using OpenAI or another model provided via an API, you don't want to rack up a bill. This is sort of a guardrail to make sure that doesn't happen. What I will do, though, before we head off, is I will share the link to that tutorial, or maybe Tilda, if you have your hands. Oh no, I've got it. So this is a tutorial that goes through exactly this type of pipeline. It's not generating GitHub issues in this one. The GitHub issues was simply a demonstration of that we built. This is simply creating structured outputs. Let me send it in the chat too. And there we have it. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Please drop them in. And if not,
Raymond says, I have a use case for that.
great. Well, share it with us on Discord if you build it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your presence and your time and your attention. We will email all these links that we shared out today, the code and the tutorials. And other than that, have a wonderful rest of your day.